It's the greatest mystery in literary history. A divisive question with highly contested answers. Who was the writer behind the pen name William Shakespeare? Welcome to Don't Quill the Messenger. Here's your host, Stephen Sable.
Hey, welcome back, fellow Quillers, to another wonderful episode of Don't Quill the Messenger. You know, I have two guests with me today by popular demand. And before I introduce them and we begin, I definitely want to give a shout out to Catherine Sharp, whose idea it was that I do an episode on this topic. And then I had one of those lightning bolt moments where I thought, well, I'm going to get them both in the same room together. And so I'm welcome to this episode, of course, one of our favorite guests, Dr. Earl Showerman, and Tom Woosnam returns as well, who has also been a guest on previous episodes. Gentlemen, thank you and welcome back.
Thank you very much.
Glad to be here, Stephen.
Now, of course, the reason that I have you two in today is because we want to share with the listeners some details about a program called OLLI, OLLI, which stands for Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. And a lot of people maybe don't know that the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, OLLI, is a national organization that has chapters mostly at different universities throughout the United States, and I don't know, maybe even into other parts of the world. It's possible. I'm not sure. I'm not aware of that. But you, Earl, of course, found your local chapter here in Southern Oregon through Southern Oregon University, and have been very active for almost 2 decades with this program. Tom is sort of like taking up the mantle now for you as you're sort of passing the torch to him in this area. But one of the things that's super important that I want listeners to know is I want them to hear your experiences, how it all began for you, what you've developed over the years, some of the students and the fun anecdotal things I'm sure you both probably have to share. But also so that people out there know that they too can do this in their local communities if they so choose.
Oh, thank you very much, Stephen. And I totally agree with you that this is an opportunity that many people who love Shakespeare, that have any kind of connection to a university in their neighborhood, should check and see if there's an OLLI program or any other kind of lifelong learning or life extension programs where they can take courses on Shakespeare, take courses on history, and eventually possibly even begin teaching it. I didn't jump into this until I had retired and began taking courses at OLLI at Southern Oregon University. It stands for the Osher Lifelong Learning Institute. The Osher Foundation in San Francisco made donations that go into a trust that supplies resources for sustaining the OLLI program at Southern Oregon University. And to date, I think they've received $2 million from the Osher Foundation to help support activities of OLLI. There are about 1,500 local students at the OLLI program, mostly retired people who are interested in continuing education. They are autodidacts, and many of them. And many of them are the volunteer teachers who had former careers as teachers in secondary education, high school, business careers in all sorts of fields, medicine in my case, law and other people's cases. But each semester there would be about 100 courses you could take for annual registration of about $100. And then you could take an unlimited number of classes. So I retired in 2003, and about 2006 or so, a friend of mine alerted me to the fact that OLLI was teaching some really cool Shakespeare classes and history classes. And I came down and I was shocked to realize that there's a wonderful, wonderful ongoing engagement in the retirement community that is almost as large as the actual undergraduate program at Southern Oregon University, and that the variety of courses was quite remarkable. Well, after a couple of years of taking classes, I took the courage to teach 1 2-hour program based on the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt from the Shakespeare Authorship Coalition. And I used that document and presented from it and had people sign that document. And it was so encouraging that the former president of the university came to that class and actually signed that document, among other people who were my personal friends. But it really gave me the courage to continue to do this on a regular basis over the years. And probably over the last 15 years or so, I've been teaching almost annually a class based on either some of my own research or some of the most recent publications. We would use videos that have been coming out, documentary videos, all sorts of tools that are out there now. And I just never got bored doing it. And we always had about 20 or 25 students come out. A number of them are now members of the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship. There are several lifetime members, actually, that went all the way into this. So it's an amazing experience. Now, of course, living in this region where we have the Oregon Shakespeare Festival and a wonderful university and a fabulous library, which we all know of, gives me great advantages. There are people really interested in the subject and willing to come back year after year to attend the courses. And I've co-taught a course on Shakespeare sonnets with Susan Stitham, who's another one of our really, really wonderful teachers. She taught high school literature, and she is a regular and just a very, very dynamic person. And it was taking my class that alerted her to the whole authorship question. And so now she's quite engaged in this and was thrilled to see Elizabeth Winkler's book, Shakespeare Was a Woman and Other Heresies, because it just fed into her own thinking and expanded her wisdom. And she's defended me when people have suggested that the whole authorship question is something not to be respected, and said, no, you just haven't done the reading. And she's a wonderful advocate that came out of taking one of my classes. So I think that you would find yourself developing a community of locally interested participants if you got engaged in somehow a lifelong learning program or some kind of extension learning, book club, however you would manifest it, and start reading some of the foundational texts. Now, I've used Hank Whittemore's 100 Reasons, the Earl of Oxford, but Shakespeare is one of my courses. One year we taught Shakespeare Identified by J. Thomas Looney, and Shakespeare Suppressed with Catherine Children. So we matched up those two books. I've taught classes that involved some of my own research. I think I taught a 4-week course on Much Ado the year that I published an article on looking at the Greek sources of that play. And it was enough material to actually extend for a period of time. So right now, the tools that are available online, the videos that are out there, the links to former conferences, Alex McNeil's Shakespeare 101, Shakespeare Authorship 101 is a wonderful resource that's on the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website. In 30 minutes, you really cover the whole subject, and it's very intriguing, and it's a fascinating mystery. And I'm so glad that my colleague Tom has taken up the gauntlet in recent years and been teaching his own brand and his own approach to this. And so I'm going to kind of turn the mic over to Tom so he can continue. But we do have, within our region, as you know, Stephen, great interest in this subject. And when 2015, when a number of British scholars came over for our conference here, there were 150 people that came out from the local community to hear them speak about the Shakespeare authorship questions. So we have many advantages here, but I think that there are a lot of communities that would really be lit up by this kind of education. So, Tom, I wonder what you have to say and share with us.
Thanks very much, Earl. You've given a good background to this. I would just like to add that there are about 120 OLLIs on different campuses of colleges and universities in the United States. And for, I think it's about $150 a year here in Southern Oregon for their OLLI. I know people who have taken as many as 13 classes per term in different subjects. And just to add to something else Earl said, many of the teachers are retirees in their own fields. And there's a phrase that I learned called FIP, F-I-P, formerly important person. And so they love to take their own expertise and teach their own individual classes. It's also a hybrid now. The ones that I do, I've got a Zoom component, and I also have an in-person component too.
That's not surprising considering what we went through not just a few years ago with, and it sort of changed the face of education on every level, didn't it? And almost everything now involves some sort of a hybrid component or some sort of online component, almost everything now.
It does. And it's very interesting to see how people are so much more comfortable now than they were, say, 3 years ago, from either end, from the teacher or the learner perspective. So
It only took us 5 years to figure out how to work Zoom properly. Is that right?
I cast no aspersions here at all.
Okay.
But just a couple of interesting anecdotes here. I had taken OLLI classes and I got up the courage to apply to do one. They didn't know me from Adam. Of course, nobody knew me at all. And I heard this much later after I gave my first class in the authorship question. There are committees which basically review the applications. And for this particular committee, and I mention no names, I've deliberately forgotten them anyway, the person who was head of the committee said, "Oh God, not this stuff again. I can't stand it. Here, you take it. I'm not going to deal with it." And the person who received the application thrown across the table, and I have become good friends. I do remember her name for sure. But that was the attitude at that point. Now, Earl had been doing the classes and doing them extremely well. But at the apex there, you had somebody who really did not want to give any air to this, shall we say.
So basically it was like, not another one. Why do we have another one of these guys here?
Tinfoil hats again. Now, the other extreme, and Earl, you may have been there. I think you were. On campus, Tim Bond was talking.
I missed that.
And, well, Tim is the new artistic director of the Shakespeare Oregon Festival, Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And basically, this is tangential, so I won't dwell on it. In my personal opinion, saved the economy of Southern Oregon because of what he brought back to the festival. He was talking in this meeting, and he said, and I quote, "Shakespeare, whoever he was." I saw that as a seminal moment right there. Here you have the artistic director of the Shakespeare Festival admitting that there are certainly questions. Now, to the extent that Earl changed enough people's minds so that at dinner parties the topic came up and Tim was there listening, we'll never know. But I'd like to think that having these conversations, teaching these classes, gets people to question their assumptions if you do it in the right way. I wanted to point that out.
No, I think that's wonderful. And before we move on, though, I do want to make sure that the listeners know that some of the details of how OLLI works. One, according to OLLI, the courses are designed for people ages 55 and over. I'm getting really close.
It's 50.
Is it 50?
Yeah.
Oh, good. Then I can qualify and go. I can start taking the classes. So it is for generally older and more retired types, right, to go and avail themselves of these courses. The courses are non-accredited. So it's not like you get college credit to use towards another degree or a secondary degree or finish school that you left, 20 years ago or whatever. That's not the point. The point is this lifelong learning, just to continue keeping your brain active, to keep your body, spirit, and mind focused on becoming a better, more educated human, the courses are in such a wide variety of things too, that you can pretty much choose whatever. You don't know until you go and look at your local OLLI branch, what's available. And again, it's going to be based on who is available in your community, who is looking to share their knowledge. And you might find something that you never thought you were interested in and decide, oh, I'm going to take that class. That looks interesting. And it kind of reminds me of that famous story about Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes when he was in his 90s and the president at the time, and I can't remember which president it is, goes to visit him and he finds him reading Plato in the original Greek. And he says, Justice Holmes, Your Honor, why are you reading Plato? At your age, why are you reading Plato in the original Greek? And Holmes famously turned to him and said, "To improve my mind."
Wonderful. Yeah, that's the motto, I think.
Yeah.
Well, I want to give you one example of what might happen in an OLLI course. I was taking an OLLI course that was a 10-week course in reading the Oresteia of Aeschylus, Robert Fagel's translation and another translation for comparative purposes. But we were doing a deep, deep dive on this play. And this is back in 2011 or so. And at the same year, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival put on a production of Macbeth that was done in the most classical and compelling and chilling fashion, and in a way that when I saw the play, I went home and immediately marked down over a dozen parallels in terms of theme, image, dramaturgy, all these things that I could see coming from a Greek source because I was doing a deep dive at an OLLI class. And I wrote a paper about that eventually got published in the Oxfordian.
We did an episode about it.
We did an episode about it.
Yeah.
And so you never know what might happen. You might just fall into something quite remarkable that gives you a key or a clue to something that really forces you into a whole new exploration and development. So, but I do agree with Tom that the variety of courses being taught by people who are natural enthusiasts for life, they will teach, many of them, a variety of different courses. They'll teach different philosophies during different eras. It's like these people are so committed to it that their soul's on fire and they're still burning beautifully. And I think that the program that is at Southern Oregon University certainly is astonishing in the sense that you can go to these classes. You will gain the respect of the other teachers that teach the same subject you're interested in, because as Tom and I might be good readers, that we can participate in the other people who teach the Shakespeare courses there and engage actively and contribute significantly to the discussion in their classes, whether from an authorship perspective or not. But we make it acceptable and a reasonable way to have a discourse. So we're very fortunate. And I feel very, very grateful that Tom continues to work with us. Of course, we've both been with the Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship and Natural Educators. I mean, Tom was the chairman of the program we just had in Denver a month ago, which was an outstanding program. And so, if you're an educator, if you love Shakespeare, if you're curious about the authorship question, take the risk, do the dive. You've got many things that would support you. And you can turn to the website. The Shakespeare Oxford Fellowship website has a lot of good resources there. And the opportunity to really have an impact and to enjoy yourself doing it and to learn yourself. Learn by example and by learning how to teach this sort of stuff. It just deepens your interest, your commitment, and your willingness to continue the dive. It's a beautiful place to be in terms of understanding Shakespeare and sharing it with other kindred spirits.
Well, one of the things that you pointed out, and I think it's important to note, is, you are a natural educator, yes, but that's not your field. You're a doctor. You're a retired doctor. Tom has been an educator and he did teach in the classroom, but it's not required to have teaching experience in order to go register a class and teach a class. And as you've pointed out, there are classes that are probably taught by lawyers and CPAs and people who maybe never actually taught in a classroom before, but they have knowledge they want to share and they're passionate about it. And there is an audience available there. And so listeners who are interested in doing this, don't feel intimidated by not having any classroom experience or education experience, because you have something that you're passionate about that you want to share. And that's like the whole purpose of the OLLI program, right? And that's like its total theme and mantra, isn't it? Is, just sharing knowledge with other humans that you happen to have and are passionate about.
But by the same token, you are supported by OLLI in that if it's your first course that you give, you're assigned an NTO, new to OLLI person, who will go over the lesson plans with you, sit through all of the classes, do a debrief afterwards, go over the questionnaire that goes out for the first-time teachers. So don't feel you're just on your own here, sink or swim. OLLI supports you.
That's great to know. I wasn't aware of that, but it makes sense that they would have, some sort of a support system to help kind of guide you along your first time out rather than just jump in the boat. Right. Here you go.
Oh, yeah. And the undergraduate interns that do the tech support couldn't live without them. How come I can't get the sound out of this movie I want to show? So you run next door and there's somebody there to help you. And so there's a collaborative quality about it. And the fact that they, during my term at OLLI, we actually had filming of Last Will and Testament and Nothing is Truer Than Truth when the filmmakers were traveling and supporting their productions. And we had over 100 people come out to see both of those films in the original, when they passed through here, the Lisa and Laura Wilson's film, Last Will and Testament. And one day I was at the Ford dealer and I'm sitting there reading Catherine Children's book, Shakespeare suppressed, and a gentleman sitting across from me says, Shakespeare probably didn't write the works of Shakespeare. Says to me at the Ford dealer, I'm reading a book called Shakespeare Suppressed. And I said, well,
tell me more.
Where did you get this opinion, sir? He said, well, I saw a video down there on campus at OLLI, I said, oh yeah, Last Will and Testament, sure. He says, well, those people are friends of mine, and I agree completely. And it turned out to be quite a notable intellectual himself. He was one of the recipients of a scientific achievement award from Barack Obama. And I thought I could hook him into the whole Shakespeare question, but Stan resisted any further engagement. But he did inform me at the Ford dealer that Shakespeare didn't write the works of Shakespeare.
I love it. That's perfect. That's a great story.
And I've got a slight counterpoint to that, if I may. When I teach my classes, I always sort of warn the participants, if you will, be careful about bringing this up in a public setting like a dinner party. Okay, fine. So about 6 weeks after I gave my last class, one of the participants came up and said, my husband was in your class and we were at dinner, and there was a lull in the conversation, and he brought up that he had just taken this class on the authorship question, at which point somebody at the table went so ballistically angry that it was one of those, well, how about them giants moments to try and get out of it. It raised such passions, and I just wish I'd been there to give some basic facts.
It's true that there are people who respond with such extreme passion about this topic on both sides of the fence, but definitely the Stratfordian side tends to get a little crazy. It's like if you dropped a Trump bomb in the middle of a Kamala Harris rally, or vice versa. I mean, people, it's like one of those things. Don't talk about religion, politics, or the authorship question at a dinner table, because you'll ruin the evening.
I do have a story to relate about that. That I was sometime, about 15 years ago, invited to speak on the authorship question at Ashland Rotary. And I knew that Paul Nicholson, the executive director of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, was likely to be in the audience, and therefore terrorized me that I would go up there and be talking about the Earl of Oxford as Shakespeare, when the executive director of the festival could be very offended sitting right in front of me in the audience. And so I began my talk by thanking Rotary for all the work they had done in quelling polio throughout the world. My mother suffered from polio. And so I got off on a good foot with them, acknowledging their great contribution as a non-government organization that did more to stop this disease than anyone in the world. And then I launched into my Shakespeare authorship question, and I was very ecumenical about it and kept an open mind about who might have written the works, but pointed out all the questions that were raised by the traditional attribution and the lack of evidence, literary evidence, that suggested the authorship belonged to that gentleman from Stratford. Well, I did not get any adverse comments from anybody during and immediately afterwards. And afterwards, Paul hung around for a bit, and then he came up to me afterwards and he looked at me and smiled and said, "I happen to agree with you, Earl. I think it is a wonderful, good question to ask." And before he retired, he sent out a personal reflection on this whole authorship question to the tens of thousands of people who are on the mailing list of the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. So he was one of our advocates. He's a signatory of the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt. And so it was a great relief that he should be of a sympathetic disposition at the one time that I thought I was being most vulnerable.
And the next step for me would ideally be for someone in the Stratfordian camp and I just to have a discussion. Doesn't have to be a debate. You can call it whatever you want, but just sit us down, exchange facts, not just feelings and all the rest of it that go into a large part of the Stratfordian position, and let the audience decide for itself. But it's very difficult to get somebody to do that. And I think sort of the mantra there is, well, it's a little bit like, I don't know, climate deniers. If you engage them, then you're encouraging them. But that's the next step that I would like to see. Somebody take this seriously so I or Earl could have a discussion with them in public. It doesn't happen.
It is true. It's very difficult. When I look back over the almost 150 episodes now of this program, there have been only rare moments when I have had a guest who has been a staunch Stratfordian. I always say, and I this program is open to all views and to all areas of research. My biggest thing is keep asking the questions, right? That's, everybody knows that, but every question is worth asking. But I have had the pleasure of having certain guests who have been, and who have been kind enough to come on and to agree to disagree and to not get confrontational about it. Of course, I treat every guest like my mother always said, your guest is your guest, treat them like a guest. And I tried to do that with every guest that I have on. But some of the ones I can remember, I had Cassidy Cash, and she has a great podcast out there, and she obviously did not want to talk about anyone else being the author. I had the artistic director from Atlanta Shakespeare, and he also, and they were doing a play about authorship, but he was like, no, it's just a play, So yeah, I've had a few here and there, but you're right. It's very difficult to get someone to come on and have a conversation about it if they have drawn their line in the sand, so to speak.
I would recommend you reach out to Chris Coleman, the artistic director of Denver Center for Performing Arts. We saw his production of Hamlet when we were at our Denver conference. That was by pure serendipity. We had arranged our hotel room. We had no idea if they were going to be producing a play. Chris Coleman was former artistic director at Portland Center Stage, and he is a signatory of the Declaration of Reasonable Doubt. He came and spoke at Concordia way back about over a decade ago, and since has moved on to lead in Denver. And he was the director of the production of Hamlet we saw, which was an excellent production. And he came and was part of a panel afterwards. But Chris is a person you might want to interview, because he's been through this authorship question, and he took a serious look at it. And he's a signatory of that declaration. And
I would love to talk to him about how that's affected his career as an artistic director over the years, what people know, how much he keeps it close to his vest, how much he lets out there or not. Because people ask me that all the time. And I always say, well, I have nothing to lose. I mean, if you know me, I host this podcast, and yes, I'm an artistic director of a Shakespeare company, and we make no bones about it. I don't have any problem. You look at we just unveiled our new logo, and it's got Oxford all over it.
Right.
We've got the star up in the upper field. We've got his colors in the shield, in the crest. That's our thing. So, I feel like just own it. If you just own it.
Yeah. Chris did produce The Beard of Avon, Amy Fried's wonderful, amusing, absolutely hysterical comedy on the whole authorship question. And I suggested that, maybe it's time to bring back The Beard of Avon in Denver. You did it very well in Portland. He said, that's a good idea. So,
well, good.
He's still actively interested in the question and forgot about the fact that that's a pretty cool play on that whole question.
Well, it's going to be really fun for me. I've seen, obviously, and been involved in many productions of Hamlet. But we're doing it this summer, our company. And my wife, Annie, is playing the title role in that long line of tradition of women playing Hamlet that dates back to probably the great Sarah Bernhardt is probably the most famous, I would think. But it's going to be interesting to see what she brings to the table in the rehearsal process because of her Oxfordian knowledge, because of how much she sees the play as autobiographical. And how she believes, not to speak for her, but she believes that Hamlet is a version of Oxford. And to know that as an actor, then to portray the role, I think changes your interpretation of certain lines and certain scenes. And of course, the 6 big soliloquies. And so it's going to be the first time that I will be working with an Oxfordian actor in this role. And I'm excited about that dynamic through the rehearsal process and the creation process, working with her as well on
that. And of course, she will have so much to call on from her own acting experience and the experience of other people who've played the role. And I just have to slip in this famous line. Laurence Olivier was once asked, I think I've got the name right here, how to do the to be or not to be speech, the big one. And he said, cut it.
Well, you know, Stephen, we did actually have the privilege in 2005 of seeing Jaymie Newcomb, who was playing Richard III, and perhaps the finest history play production I ever saw at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. And as an Oxfordian, it was our first joint conference between the Shakespeare Fellowship and the Shakespeare Oxford Society 2005. And we were privileged to have Jaymie's play going. And he was an Oxfordian, came and spoke at our conference. At the end of the play, he holds his hand up with a big O. Now that could stand for Oregon Shakespeare Festival or Oxford. But he was brilliant in this role, and it was a stunning experience. He was portrayed on double crutches like a spider, a poisonous influence, and it was directed by Libby Apple, the artistic director of the festival. In my mind, the combination of knowing this is the Earl of Oxford's story, telling the story of Richard, a political propaganda story, of course, but it was just fascinating to see what an Oxfordian could do with it, and what a privilege for us to have that experience.
And you will have a great role to play as well, in that you'll have the director's notes to make your case too, right, Stephen?
Indeed. Indeed.
Let's go with that,
Yeah. Well, and we're very blessed. Obviously we talk about the Southern Oregon being this, bastion of Shakespeare. It really is. It's a unique location on the planet. Obviously thanks to Angus Bomer so many years ago, bringing it here and what he did to develop it. And, you talk about like the Lily Apple days, and those are like the golden era days of the most recent several decades, I'd say. But it is a privilege to us too, because it was a built-in audience here when we decided to start our own thing. The crowds just kept coming, and they keep coming, they keep growing, and now we're in a vineyard, which is fabulous. You can't go wrong with Shakespeare and wine.
Right.
So, but yeah, it is also sort of my, I'll call it an avocation to share the word however I can. Mm-hmm. And I make it very clear to anyone who will ask me. In fact, my wife always says, don't get him started. And I always quote Earl. I always say, yes, I am. I'm an Oxfordian. It's true.
Right.
Everything too much, Stephen. Yep. Everything too much.
Indeed.
You are standing on the shoulders of giants there with Angus Bomer, who started the festival in 1935, so 90 years ago next year. Mm-hmm. And you know this story, I know, but maybe your listeners don't. They weren't sure at all that they would make any money, that it would survive. And so they put on a boxing match at the same time or after the show to make some money, because they thought the show itself, which I think was 12th Night, I believe, would just bomb. So he had insurance back in those days.
I'm not into boxing, so luckily I have wine.
When I moved here in the 1970s, I was privileged to meet Angus Bomer and host him for several brunches. We had a medical meeting, conferences on Sunday brunches after we'd seen several plays and had days of medical education. And I wrote a letter to the festival and asked if someone would come and speak to our group about the festival. And Angus Bomer calls me up at home, and he said, well, can I bring my wife, Gertrude? He said, of course. And how about a couple of those musicians? And the actors are always hungry. Could he bring a few of those along, because they would like to speak too? And it's like the generosity of the man and the spontaneity and goodness in his heart and the magnetism that he had somehow really made something grow here in Southern Oregon that is of extraordinary nature. And years ago, it was rated among the top 1 or 2 repertory companies in the entire nation. So we've been privileged to live here and enjoy this festival for so long. And no wonder we're so addicted to the word and exploring the source.
So, and that's one of the funny things that you find when you do come across certain Stratfordians and they learn that you are an Oxfordian or that you're a skeptic or a doubter or whatever. And one of the best compliments I ever get is when somebody of that ilk or nature and they discover, oh, you're one of those people. And then this is the one I love the most. But you know so much about Shakespeare. It's like, well, thank you. Yes, I do. He's a giant part of my life, like regular giant part of my life, which is why I believe how I believe. And it's too bad that you can't see that. But yeah, I always love that one. But you know so much about Shakespeare. Well, yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. I set out to learn as much about him as I can, including who he is. including his true identity. So I want to touch back. I want to circle back just a moment on a couple of things, because one, what you just said about Angus Bomer and that generosity and his willingness to just show up and talk and speak. And I think that is an echo of what we're talking about here in this episode, is that's what the two of you have done, right? Is you have a willingness to share this topic, to share what you've learned about it, to get up in front of others and speak. And I think what we're trying to do is encourage other listeners out there who may feel the same way, that they should do the same thing. And you never know what's going to happen. You never know who's going to be in that OLLI class and what they're going to be able to do with it, or how many converts you might make. And I'm also glad that you mentioned that speaking in front of the Rotary Club, because that's something else I'd like to encourage listeners to do, which is find your local Rotary Club, find your local Kiwanis Club, your local Lions Club, your local Eagles, your local Moose Lodge. Here in Oregon, we have a weird one that I'd never heard of before I moved here. It's the something Order of Odd Fellows. It's the infernal, not infernal.
International Order of Odd Fellows.
Yeah, those infernal Odd Fellows. International Order of Odd Fellows. Which is very similar to like an Eagles Lodge, I think, or a Moose Lodge. Anyway, if you find those organizations in your community, there's always someone who is on the current board of directors of those organizations who is in charge of programming. They're always the person who is responsible for making sure that there is a guest speaker at the meetings. And I know some Rotary specifically, every meeting, there's a guest presentation of some sort, usually around 20 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes tops is usually what they ask you to do. And they are having there's probably a couple of weeks of the year that they don't meet, holidays, whatever, but I'm guessing between 45 and 50 meetings a year. So that person has to schedule 45 to 50 presenters every year. And you can only have like the canine officer and his dog come in so many times. That's a really common, popular one, by the way. Yeah. But you can only have that happen like so many times, right? And sometimes it's like the guy who works at the water treatment plant comes in and talks about how much chlorine they use to treat the river water. Like sometimes it's really mundane stuff. Sometimes it's really interesting stuff. But what I'm saying is get a hold of your local service organizations and offer yourself up as a speaker. They'll be happy to have you. They need people so bad, and they'll be so happy to have you. And then you get yourself in front of a group of local business people and philanthropists, and you get to give 20 minutes, 30 minutes. It's a great practice too. If you're considering doing an OLLI class, it's a great practice to go speak for an organization for 20 to 30 minutes and see how you do and how you like it and how you feel.
And this is where I have to jump in and say that if you are thinking of this, listeners, there are resources for you. I will volunteer right now. If you'd like to contact me, then I have a 20-minute presentation, I have a 45-minute presentation, hour long. Steal it, take it, whatever you want, because it's a distillation of all of the mistakes that I've made over the years. You don't have to make the same mistakes I made. So I'm volunteering that.
I agree. And I as well. I have several different versions of different lengths. The most recent one I gave was last spring when we were in Minneapolis. I spoke to the Minneapolis Women's Club. They were kind enough to invite me in, and I gave a 45-minute presentation on the authorship question for them. And what I have, and I'm sure what you have, and there are several of us out here who have them. So contact me and I'll get you in touch with whoever presentation you would like to get a copy of. Everyone is willing to share. They're generally, I don't know, Tom, about yours. Mine's a PowerPoint presentation.
Correct.
And it's easy to go in and edit certain slides. And I can even outline and say, you want to edit this slide because this slide basically introduces who I am and why I know this stuff. You want to edit this slide because it's usually the slide I use that targets whatever the audience is. You don't want it to say Minneapolis Women's Club, right? If it's going to be, St. Louis Rotary Club or whatever. But it's really easy to go in and just edit those few slides. I have my text all written, so I can provide you not only the PowerPoint slides, but also the text that accompanies those slides. And you can literally read it off the page if you want to. And I know you probably have the same thing. So if you're out there and you're thinking, I'd like to give that a try, you know how to reach me. Contact at don'tquillthepodcast.com. contact@don'tquailthepodcast.com. I'll get you in touch with Tom or any of the other presenters that you have seen. If you're on an SOF website or a DVS website or any other YouTube channel or whatever, and you see a presentation, you go, I'd like to give that presentation, odds are I know how to reach that person, and odds are they'd be more than happy to share it with you.
And digging just a little bit deeper, I'm not sure if you do this, Stephen, but I always start out by destroying the case for the man from Stratford.
Yes.
Because otherwise, if you just present Oxford, you're presenting a solution looking for a problem, essentially. You have to start out with that, in my experience.
I agree. And I even have a slide in my presentation that shows like the Droschut engraving with a dunce hat on him.
Right.
Like this moron could not have done it.
When I would teach an OLLI class, I would always provide a syllabus that would have links and have titles of books, the most recent ones, like the last 5 years being published. And there would be assigned readings mostly throughout, depending on what course we were doing, but giving them the video links actively by an email so that somebody could click on Keir Cutler's Is Shakespeare Dead? And be vastly entertained for 30, 45 minutes by a wonderful actor doing his one-man show that we actually were privileged to see when we had our conference back in Connecticut several years back. But, there are so many resources that you can access with a few clicks, and that would support you in teaching this. And you can just introduce the film and put Keir Cutler up, and then talk about the fact that Mark Twain wrote a very significant questioning the authorship point, and people will be very much entertained by that. But it makes it easy for you to do this kind of teaching when you have those kind of support systems available to you.
Sharing historic and famous skeptics is always a great one, right? And you could probably do a whole OLLI class just on the histories of some of those great skeptics throughout history that have questioned this and just bounce from one to the next, to the next, to the next. I have a slide that includes many of those names just to kind of give it a little extra credibility, right? And one of the things that happens every time I give a presentation is I do have a slide that has book covers. Some of my favorite books that are in my collection of some of our friends and authors who have written them. And always people will pull out their phone and take a photo of that slide so that then they have those book titles and covers in a picture in their phone. And then they can go on to Amazon or wherever and look for those titles and order them themselves later. The same thing happens when I put a slide with like links to resources. They'll take a photo of the slide, and then they have it, and then they can go and do their own research and do their own rabbit holing. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to just get in front of eyes. I worked, one of my many, many jobs that I worked for an estate planning law firm. And I was the PR and marketing director. And one of the things that this organization that the lawyer I worked for was a member of, they would do annual conferences that teach you how to get your lawyer in front of people. And they had these prepackaged presentations too that he had with slideshows and scripts and the whole deal. And it was our job to get him in front of as many sets of eyeballs as possible every month, because the math played out that if you got him in front of 150 people, at least this many people would come in for a meeting, at least this many people would get their estate plan done, and the numbers played out and the money came in. This is a very similar concept, right? It's a numbers game. Get out in front of people, and you don't know how many converts you're going to make in that room. P.S. You're not selling them anything. You're not trying to sell them a $3,800 estate planning system. You're just providing information. And look how many super sleuths we've created just in the 6 years of this podcast.
And what I always like to do, if I can, is give the counter argument. I like to say that things don't really get interesting for me until you hear the counter argument to the counter argument. So Stratfordians present their case, I present my case, and then the Stratfordians counter my case. Then it really, really gets interesting, but it very rarely gets to that level because they have no case. It's a little frustrating. And in my classes, I still want pushback from people. I still want them to say, but what about this, this, and this? I haven't gotten it yet. Now, what they said afterwards or to their friends, I have no idea. But I do remember the last one that I gave. A gentleman came in with that look on his face of, you're not going to change my mind. Exactly, that's right. The arms folded. Never made eye contact, sat there looking down the whole time. I destroyed the case for the man from Stratford. When I say that, I'm not being facetious here. We all know what the facts are. There's zero evidence, as opposed to at least 24 other authors, that he wrote anything. He never said a word, but never came back for the other classes either. So he's the most negative I know.
I was going to ask you both, have you ever had one of these two things? Have you ever had a student who questioned you so much that it interfered with your ability to deliver the information, like they sort of usurped the class? Or did you ever have somebody just get up and walk out?
I never had that experience. And in fact, a person who never accepted the authorship attribution question came to every one of my classes over at least a decade. Alan would show up right there and listen, do the reading. I never was able to shake his faith in the traditional narrative, yet he came respectfully all the time. And so my experience was that people really treated you with respect because you were being serious about something that you could do a deep dive on and provide pretty quickly some documentary evidence that what you're speaking of has some narrative value. I think the thing that really I want to tell the listeners is that this can be something that makes you happy, something that gives you a degree of joy because you're engaging deeper into something and sharing it in a way that was going to stimulate other people into a sense of wonder, a sense of mystery, a sense of something really different going on underneath it all. And when you get down to the place where you are, like Roger Strittmatter is in the library at Audley End, looking at the annotations in a Greek edition of Cassius Dio, and you recognize the handwritings, that is the Earl of Oxford, for which you can find forensic confirmation and publication, you know that you are deep into a wonderful mystery that connects Shakespeare to the Earl of Oxford, to the Greek sources, to the narratives that you find in the classical dramas he produced. So there's a sense of magic and mystery and exploration that's cutting edge right now. So people get onto it and start reading and start teaching. There's a wonderful world yet to be explored that will reveal things about Shakespeare in the decades ahead that will be revelatory and perhaps even change the idea of who might have written those works.
Well, and it sounds, Earl, like you through this process, and again, you've been doing this for a very long time now, and I don't know how many total classes that you've taught or how many total students that represents, but it also sounds like there were times during the process where you developed what have become lifelong friendships through this process too. So there's another enrichment aspect to that, isn't there? That if you go and you teach a class at OLLI and suddenly 20 people from the community show up and they're in a similar age range as you, they're obviously of a similar mindset in that they want to continue to expand their minds and continue to learn and enrich their lives. And suddenly you now might have new friends that are now friends to go to the theater together or go out to dinner or start a bridge club or who knows what. I mean, whatever the other interests might happen to be. But it seems to me like it's a great way also to meet new people and bring them into your life, and that can develop into lifelong friendships and enrich your life in that way as well.
Well, just to emphasize that and back up what you just said, I retired to Ashland from the Bay Area in 2019. My wife was born in Ashland. We live in her grandparents' house. She's a fifth generation Ashlander. So she was, in a sense, coming home. I had just given up 45 years of teaching. The classic thing for guys, their life is their work, right? So I had to face that when I came up here. And when people asked or still ask me about how retirement is, my pat answer basically is what you just said. The key is to find community, at least for me. And OLLI has been that community. It is so broad in its interests in different people who, as we've said throughout this program, want to learn. You want to hang around with people like that.
So give me an idea, like, so what I'd love to hear is some of your favorite stories. You've shared a few already, but I'd like to hear some of your favorite stories about, like, maybe the class that went wrong, or the class that blew your mind, or the student who came with that, like, who sat in the back the entire time and not till the very end, like, who you thought you had lost and wasn't engaged at all. And at the very end, they come up and tell you how much their mind has been blown and how changed their life has been. Like, those kinds of moments in an educator's life are some of the funnest moments. So I'd like to hear, like, just share a couple of stories, if you would, about what this experience has been like for you, highs and lows.
Oh, I'll tell you, Linda, it was one of the students that came to the classes all along, and I believe she was even an Oxfordian before I began teaching. And one evening, I was at the Oregon Shakespeare Festival. There was a production going on in which an actor came out into the audience to recruit someone to come up and play the king. And she arranged for me to walk the boards of the Elizabethan Theater, the Oregon Shakespeare Festival, by pointing me out to the king. And I was sitting in the Earl of Oxford's chair that we dedicated many years ago in his name during the time they were fundraising for the Oregon Festival. So it all was a perfect alignment. I got to wear the crown, walk up on the stage, and then take my exit and keep the crown to the final bows. And then I had to turn it back in, and then they brought me up on the stage to bow again. So thank you, Linda. You made my life so much better because of our shared belief in this. So that was my premier experience of being able to walk the boards at the festival because of a student that liked my teaching.
I don't think I have any really negative ones. I've been trying to come up with some. But because my friends know of my interest in the topic, I do downplay it, just like you do, like Annie says about you, don't get him started, But I can think of an arch Stratfordian friend of mine. I acted with him in the Bay Area, known him for many, many years. Slowly, without pushing it too hard at all, coming around to, well, perhaps there is an argument to be made. So that, if you will, borders on negative, though it really wasn't. It's a question of just don't push it too far. Just let people find it for themselves. And there's a tool, I'm going slightly off topic for your question here, but there's a tool that is the most useful, I think, Stephen, which is Occam's razor, which, as we know, at least people think they know, but Occam's razor says that given two arguments, if you know everything about both sides, then the one with the least number of assumptions is likely to be true. It doesn't prove that it's true. Most people think that it's the one with the simplest explanation. No, it's the one with the fewest number of assumptions. So when one uses Occam's razor with candidates, I think that's the most objective one can be. And in the case of it, and I'm fascinated by all the other candidates out there. I do not in any way say, no, none of them had anything to do with it. I can always learn from reading about them. But for me, Oxford stands out because of the way he was discovered. In other words, somebody didn't think, oh, that sounds like Shakespeare, I'll go and prove that it was. I don't like that approach. As you know, Thomas Looney said, I have no idea who it is. I've got some characteristics. I'll go and see, perhaps, if there's somebody who wrote like Shakespeare but didn't use the name. And lo and behold, he stumbled on somebody who fitted every single characteristic. He didn't start with his conclusion, in other words. Mm-hmm. So if you use Occam's razor, then you have De Vere and compare him against everybody else. And if somebody else has a stronger case, I'm going to go with that person. I'm not tied to Edward de Vere. He's just the strongest candidate out there. I don't think anyone else can come close. So the next class that I'm thinking of doing for OLLI, trying to bring it back to the topic here, I don't think it'll be next term, but maybe the following one. I'm thinking of calling it William, and Edward. So William of Ockham, William Shakespeare, and Edward de Vere, and use Occam's razor to see if I can get more people involved.
I like that. That's catchy and clever, both at the same time. So I think that would be a really fun class to take.
Well, Tom is a real cut up, I mean, way back in the day, he actually volunteered to debate Barry Kraft, who was a dramaturg at the festival, an actor, a renowned local, of deep knowledge Shakespeare scholar, who's actually continues to teach Shakespeare through the Rogue Theater Company. So Tom and Barry have a very respectful relationship, and Tom can tell you what the outcome was of their discourse, but he earned the respect of Barry Kraft by having the courage to step in and give her case in a fair and judicious way. And I think there are ways that I've had interactions with, like the chairman of the Rogue Community College, Vern Underwood, who was a wonderful scholar and a really fine teacher, who did not really want to have any authorship discourse in the course that I took with him. And so I was one of the classes I actually dropped out of. But later on, when the question came up, he invited me to come and speak at his class and for an hour, telling them anything I wanted to say about the authorship question with his approval. So I think showing respect and being willing to engage and not be too fearful about it really can pay off in the end. And in the end, you'll have a discourse of reason. And that's all we're asking for, just like Hamlet.
Indeed. And it's incredible to hear your stories and to know that there are so many times when so many of us who are interested in this topic run into brick walls of Stratfordians, or worse, we get attacked, or, people are bashing us on social media or name calling, or in case of a very recent guest, you get sued. I mean, there's so many ways that this can play out in a negative fashion. But it's great to hear that in this type of an environment, it doesn't happen that way. And so I hope that those who are thinking about this, who are listening, if their concern is that they get up in front of a group of people and start sharing stuff about this question, that they're going to be, heckled, or people are going to storm out or shout at them or whatever. Yes, it can get that way in certain circles, but it doesn't sound like that it gets that way in this type of a circle and in an OLLI type of a setting. So I hope that no one feels gun shy about the idea, if it is striking them while they listen, that this is something they want to pursue.
And that is a theme of this particular program. And thank you for taking this on and giving all sides to it. You're really encouraging people to step up, and we're letting them know there is support. And also, you will get questions you cannot answer on the spot, and you don't make it up. You say, that's a good point. Yeah, can I get back to you on that one? And in so doing, you are showing respect. It's also good if you can bring humor into it as well. I don't think there's anything better than self-deprecating humor to change somebody's mind.
Sure, I agree with that. There's something to that, definitely. So, Earl, of all the classes that you taught, which one did you teach most?
Well, I think the thing that I enjoyed teaching the most were a class on Much Ado About Nothing, because I had done a deep dive on that play, and I could see all the connections to the Earl of Oxford through because of the literary sources. 3 or 4, Anthony Munday, John Lilly, Thomas Watson, they all wrote things that were referred to in Much Ado About Nothing, which has a very clear Greek influence, particularly in the scene of reunion of Hero and Claudio, with a veiled bride awaiting reunion, who's presumed to have been dead. And in studying that play, I was able to make an original recognition that there was a parallel in a chorus in the Alcestis, honoring the death of Queen Alcestis and recounting her fame, that is exactly parallel to the memorial scene toward Hero. And it was never previously commented upon in any of the literature I've reviewed about that. And I could see I could extend beyond the customary view that the scene at the very end with Claudio and Hero being reunited and her unveiled was dependent on Euripides' Alcestis. But beyond that the chorus that precedes that also ties Shakespeare to this Greek original. And deepens the understanding that we have of how well he introduced parallels that would draw from that ancient drama. I was excited because I had done what I considered to be perhaps something original, and that later got reprinted in a collection of essays on Much Ado in Gale Publications. So apparently it met some scholarly approval along the way. To me, that was the most fun course because I had done something unique.
Well, and a course like that also, it invites the student to examine the work, not the author.
Yeah.
And then when you come to conclusions about the mastery of the work, it starts to become more and more clear that the author, we've been told, could not possibly have had the knowledge, the access, the ability to create that master work. And I love that approach to this topic. I love being able to demonstrate the absolute sheer brilliance of the work and the source material it's connected to.
Right.
And then ask the question, now tell me again how this guy from Stratford did all of this. Tell me again, he's an alien from outer space, right? Is that it? Because I can't imagine any other way that he has this kind of talent, this kind of access to libraries, knows these languages by heart, and can create words out of multiple languages combined together to tell a story that's been told 200 years ago only in its native language. That's the part that, sometimes the Stratfordians, of course, they don't know how to come back from that.
2,000 years ago, Stephen.
In this case, yes. But
yes.
I'm talking about the original Italian texts
Understood.
that Much Ado is also based in.
Yeah.
Those were like 200 years before Much Ado was written, right? Like 1400s.
Well, as Eddie Jolly said, he is the most self-consciously literate writer in all of history. I mean, his plays are so overladen with classical influence, with influences from biblical sources, from medieval sources, from Renaissance sources, that the mosaic, the mimetic art is at its highest achievement, which is to incorporate all those other literary themes and reflections into a singular work that has its own unity. And that was Shakespeare's genius.
His powers of retention astound me, because in order for the man to have written all that he wrote with all these sources and all these references, what's locked in that brain that he's able to, it's like walking library, right? He's just this walking giant library, and the way he incorporates different things into different plays. And one of my favorites is, if you ever have a chance, you need to go stand at the tomb of Castiglione, and you need to see Bruno's sculpture there. Not Bruno. Who am I thinking?
You're thinking of
I just
Romano.
Sorry, I just went to astronomy. But which is also something that's incredible in the works too. But anyway, back to Giuliano Romano, right? So if you look at that sculpture of Christ coming out of the stone, and then you look at Winter's Tale and Hermione's sculpture resurrecting, coming to life, and you go, this guy was so moved by that he had to write it into a play later on, but remembered it in such detail and so perfectly that you literally see it coming to life before you on the stage when you see that play. And then having that kind of context is, again, just one of those moments where you go, okay, there's only one person could have done this. Only one person we know for a fact stood right. And when I stood right there too, I was like, oh, he stood right here staring at this same statue the way I'm staring at it now. I mean, that was kind of cool.
Well, you've touched on the most important argument, I think, here. If you look at all the different candidates, you have to ask the question, did this candidate go to Italy? Because it's perfectly clear the author did.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah, you're right. And just slightly tangential, I don't want to go off topic here, so I will. Giuliano Romano was the only name of an artist in the works of Shakespeare. But the interesting thing is, and I've tried to track this down, the reference for him being a sculptor is very, very hazy. But there was a man called Cristoforo Romano who was a sculptor. And I can leave it right there because I don't have any other resources at my fingertips, but it's something every now and then I sort of dig down and try and find that connection. So did he actually make a mistake when he said
I think I'm going to suggest an alternative interpretation of what that sculpture looked like. The sculpture in that era were painted. Classical Greek sculptures were painted with color. They were human-like colors painted on those statues. Romano was a renowned naturalist painter.
Yes.
So Romano's art could have been taken, somebody's sculpture, and painted it with the detail and the beauty that is encapsulated in the image of Hermione.
Well, when you go to the church where Castiglione's tomb is, and you look at that sculpture, and they call it the resurrection, because it is Christ literally walking out of the stone. Instead of the stone being rolled back and him coming out of a cave, he's literally walking out of a piece of marble. And part of him is still in the stone. So you can see that what Romano did was he had a giant block of stone and he chiseled it away to reveal the Christ figure that he saw, and then left 1 foot and 1 hand inside the stone. It's magnificent. And then, as you point out, Earl, well, then this great artist, if he painted pigment on it, it must have looked lifelike. It must have. And right there in the church, you can read some of the history, and it was Castiglione's mother who knew Romano personally and begged him to create the sculpture over her son's tomb in that church. So that's an incredible.
Didn't know that.
Yeah, it's Castiglione's mother who went to Giuliano Romano and said, "I want you to create a sculpture for my son's tomb." Yeah, and that's what he chose.
And this is a discourse of reason, my friends. This is exactly why you need to form a community of fellow Oxfordians in your neighborhood.
Yes.
Through OLLI or whatever operation you can do. You know, there are resources available to help you out with that, but have some fun. Have some real conversations like these.
And of course, it makes sense that Edward de Vere would want to go to see Castiglione's grave because of how much he revered the writings of Castiglione,
The courtier,
and how that book was like the Bible of noblemen in its day. And so if you're passing through there, and it's in between Padua and it's just outside of Mantua on your way to Verona. And so that's why we did it. We're like, well, hey, we just pop right over here. We're going to be going right past here anyway. And I ended up getting a ticket because I drove the rental car down the cobblestone street to get to the church, and you're not allowed to drive there. And they have cameras. And like months later, I get this ticket in the mail from Italy saying, you owe us 87 euros for driving down this street. The traffic isn't allowed to drive on. It's a pedestrian walkway. I was like, I didn't know. Oops. Sorry. So it was a very expensive little side journey. But yeah, it's, you're going through there and it's there. Of course he's going to go. Of course he's going to go. By the way, the church it's like 14th century church. And it's one of those upside down ship's holes, the ceiling. There are 3 levels of wooden sculptures surrounding the church, and it's all the lives of those saints and martyrs. And it's macabre because it's all of their deaths.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
Is this a pilgrimage for Italians or Americans who don't even know of the authorship question? Do people visit that church?
They should. And I don't know, but I do know that the thing is they have a little box outside of the tomb, and you have to drop a coin in the box to get the lights to come on so that you can see it. And it stays on for a little while, and then it shuts off, and you have to put more money in the box for the light to come back on. And I only had €2 coins. It doesn't take paper. And there's no change machine. Right. So I only got to stare at it for those brief moments. And then it was dark again. And I had no more change. I couldn't look at it anymore.
Does that suggest there was different lighting back in the day so it could get that view without artificial light?
Yes, indeed. Yeah, absolutely. And there are torch sconces, so it probably was torchlight. So then you can imagine the shadows of this painted sculpture coming out of this stone, and what that must have looked like at that time, and obviously ingrained itself in his brain. And he said, I'm using that in a play.
So Stratfordians would say, well, there are lots of sculptures like that. You could have seen it anywhere. Do we know of any others like that, Stephen?
Not that I'm aware of. Not that would make the most sense, and not that you could easily tie together so well as you can to the Earl of Oxford. Do we have proof he went to that church? No. We have proof he traveled through there. And so having proof that he traveled through there is enough to say, well, why wouldn't you? If you're him and you love that writer so much, why wouldn't you? It's the same thing as people who know they're traveling through Stratford who stop at that grave, don't they?
Don't get us started.
I mean, I'm just saying. Well, before we wrap things up, is there any last words of wisdom you'd like to share with the listeners about the OLLI program, other than go out there, go do it?
I think you've said it. Yeah, absolutely. Go online, look up OLLI, find one close to you. And what do they say? It's like if you're learning to be a diver, you'd better know how to swim. You better check there's water in the pool. But in the end, you just have to do it.
I will share with everybody though, like when you do a search, because I just did a random Google search of OLLI, and if you do that, you're going to come up with a variety of different things. You need to spell it out, Osher Lifelong Learning Institute, in order to have a more accurate search, and it's OSHER. Once you get that in there, the rest of it will fall together pretty well, whether it's Google, Bing, whatever search engine you're using. But what will normally pop up is the ones that are at the biggest universities in the country. So like University of Michigan popped up as one, like the first ones, even though I live here in Oregon. So you want to make sure that you're doing some sort of a regional search as well, or you go to the actual OLLI website, not the website of this university who happens to have an OLLI program, or this university that happens to have an OLLI program, in order to find the one closest to you. And again, there, as Tom pointed out, there's 120, I think you said, Tom, locations throughout the country. Most of them are at major universities, but sometimes smaller universities and private schools too. So you just want to try to type in something that's a geographical indicator as well when you're searching to find the closest one to you. I think that's important.
And something else to point out, we're very lucky here in Southern Oregon that it's only $150 for the entire year. In other places, it's much more expensive. And in other places, the instructors also get paid. We don't. We're all volunteers. I just throw that out there.
So each program is going to be a little bit different depending upon the university it's connected to, I'm
Correct.
guessing, and how they're funded and how much grant money they're receiving or not from the institute itself, and all of those dynamics you'll not know until you look into the one closest to you. But I encourage everybody, go out there, find it. Even if you just start with finding it and taking a class. You might find something really interesting to you that you want to take a class, see how a class works. And then after you've taken a class, go, I could do this. This is easy.
See one, do one, teach one.
Yeah.
That's what we learned in med school. See one, do one, teach one.
There you go. Is that true about like surgeries and bodies and everything too, Earl?
That'll be for a future program.
Okay. Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. My two guests, our most famous and most common guest, of course, Dr. Earl Showerman and Tom Woosnam back. I think this is your third time with us, Tom, if I'm not mistaken, but glad to have you back. And so wonderful that you're carrying on the tradition that Earl started here in the Southern Oregon chapter of OLLI. And for the rest of you out there, I hope you feel inspired. I hope you go find, if not your local OLLI, then at least maybe your local Rotary Club or Kiwanis Club. Go give presentations. Start your own little speakers bureau and form your own little Oxfordian community around you. You know, as I always say, one skeptic at a time. It truly is a mission. And before wrapping up, I just want to take a brief moment to thank all of you for sharing in this mission as loyal listeners, fellow Quillers, and supporters. Those of you who have been or continue to be or may soon become official members of the Quiller Nation at our Patreon page, I want to send you all a special thank you. You help cover the costs of producing this fine series month after month with fortnightly episodes, and we truly couldn't continue without you. If you've been on the fence about officially joining the Quiller Nation, I encourage you to visit our Patreon page to see the various levels at which you can help support the show. Of course, if you join at the Serial Quiller level, you gain access to our entire library of bonus feature episodes, and you get entered into our Quiller of the Month drawing to earn that high status and a free item from our Quiller swag shop. Lots of Quillers wear their Quiller swag with great pride, and it serves as a perfect conversation starter with other people to help share the podcast with them. The ingenious logo created by our own producer Jake is eye-catching and provocative, sparking questions from those who see it almost every time I don it on one of my pieces of apparel or coffee mug. My favorite item, of course, though, is my Earth is Round shirt. I get compliments and questions on that shirt almost every time I wear it. It's the design with the 4 facts written across the chest. The Earth is undeniably round. Bats can actually all see. Frankenstein is the doctor's name. And Shakespeare was Edward de Vere. It's a great shirt. It's a wonderful design. It's super popular in the swag shop. And it always gets comments and questions whenever I wear that shirt. Whenever I travel, I try to wear that shirt. Through airports, on airplanes. I just can't, I'm hoping people will come up to me, say something about it, ask me about it, and then I hand them a little card that I carry about the podcast. So you could do the same thing. By ordering an item from the shop, you not only get to show off some Quiller swag, but you also help contribute a small amount because we don't really it's not a profit thing. It's more about spreading the word. But it is a small amount that goes towards production costs, server fees, equipment maintenance, software licensing, and all the other things that Jake and I take care of in order to make sure that the program continues to come to you. Maybe the Serial Quiller level isn't quite for you, but even just becoming an official Quiller at the $5 level is meaningful as a contribution and much appreciated. But I do encourage you to explore our bonus library. There are episodes on analysis of specific plays. The 2-part series on the death of Edward de Vere and the shady circumstances around that is a really intriguing one that most of the serial Quillers have contacted me about and really, really enjoyed. The film watch-alongs are there and so much more. And more bonus features are on their way, I promise, including a deep dive into the current state of the Oxfordian movement, a new film-to-film comparison episode, a previously unreleased episode from the recording archives. That's a special one that I've been sort of sitting on and saving for a while, but it is in the queue now. And much, much more. So please go to our Patreon page. That's patreon.com/don'tquillthemessenger. That said, I'd like to shout out to last month's Quiller of the Month, teacher Mallory, who has been a member of the Quiller Nation for some time now. Congrats again, teacher Mallory, and thank you for your continued support. But it's time now to welcome producer Jake once again to spin the wheel of destiny and announce our Quiller of the Month for November 2024.
Thank you, Stephen. It is always a pleasure to get to do these honors. If you're not sure what this is, well, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/don'tquillthemessenger. And read all about it each and every month. All eligible patrons get entered into this monthly contest to see who will be named the official Quiller of the Month. That person gets an item they are choosing from the shop. And of course, the clout of carrying with that honor in the record books for all of eternity. Without further ado, for the month of November, my favorite month of the year, I'm just a big Thanksgiving guy. What could I say? The official Quiller of the Month for November 2024 is Edward Henke. Edward Henke, congratulations and thank you so much for your continued support. Thanks to everybody who continues to support the page. Like Steve said, your patron dollars keep the show going. Without you, we absolutely could not, would not, should not be spreading this fascinating mystery around as far as we can. Thanks again, and back to you, Steve.
Thank you, Jake. We always love to hear from you. And real quick before we go, Quiller Nation, Jake and I are working on the date to do this year's anniversary episode as a live stream episode you will be able to access and be a part of in January through the Patreon page. So stay tuned for more details about that in the coming weeks. It's going to be super excited. You only will be able to access it live through the Patreon page. That's part of that. That's the hook, right? We'll make no bones about it. It will then go up as a recorded episode to be listened to by others later. But if you'd like to join us live, you're going to need to make sure that you at least join the free aspect of the Patreon page, which you can do, by the way. Many people don't know that, but you can become a member and not become a subscriber. And you'll get all the details and information through that and be able to watch us live through patreon.com. For the upcoming anniversary show in January. It's hard to believe that another year has gone by so quickly. 6 seasons. It's kind of incredible. And we're very quickly approaching our 150th official episode. So that's exciting as well. Anyway, without any further ado, Quiller Nation, thank you. We love you. We appreciate you. And we're so happy that you join us every 2 weeks for new episodes of this intriguing mystery. Until next time, keep asking questions.
If you've enjoyed today's episode, please leave a rating and review in your podcast player. For even more, visit our website, don'tquillthepodcast.com. There you can find official merchandise in our shop, as well as a link to our Patreon. This show is made possible by people like you. We hope you'll consider showing your support by becoming a monthly patron, where you'll receive bonus material and tons of exclusive perks. You can also join in the conversation on our Discord and by following us at Don't Quill the Pod on all social media. All of this can be found at don'tquillthepodcast.com, don'tquillthepodcast.com.
Dragon Wagon.